Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Young, who's a very busy guy and does lots of different things in the world of youth sport, athlete development, media production. I'm going to let him introduce himself. But Matt, it's really great that we could have this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Love the show, love what you're doing. So I appreciate it.
Brilliant. I wonder if you could just start off by, I love stories, I always like listening to coaches' stories and people who are working in the space. So just tell us what your story and how you arrived doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, I'm going to be really transparent here. I came from a dysfunctional upbringing where sport basically saved my life. Not in terms of being overweight. A lot of people have the overweight stories and getting into sport as a means to kind of get fit and healthy. Mine was a little bit different. It was more on the social emotional side of things, and used sport to really find out who I was, to establish a tribe, to really work on things like the self-esteem. The attention and gains I got through sport really helped me kind of shape my future and shape my interest. And of course, when I went through it on the high school and varsity level and then got out into the career, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and that was help as many people discover the same things that I discovered through sport. So finished up university, got into the personal training space in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and really I'm not sure if you know much about the personal training space in North America, but really it was all about the celebrity trainer. There was no value that was being given to the member or the clients. It was all about Johnny or Jenny six pack and look at us, and we've got our own website, and if you come here, you'll look like us. It's kind of that. It's no regulation, no government oversight, no authority, and so we went into it with the notion of, hey, listen, we're going to build a team. So we're going to really build a team, and our X factor is going to be, it's not going to be about just us as the owners and principals. We're going to make it all about the client, which I know seems really counterintuitive and novel, but it is in our sector. So really we started off with one client, and our whole mission was to, personal reinvention through physical challenge, adversity, and victory. We're big believers on the fact that there is no authentic victory where there is no adversity, and there's no adversity where there's no challenge. So when people would come to us and say, we would ask them a simple question: what have you always wanted to do health and fitness wise that you've never done before? Or what have you always wanted to do that you don't think you can do? And then they would give us the answer, and then we would do that. We work towards it. So the gym and the facility was just a conduit to kind of, the mental and physical strength and belief system that they needed to accomplish whatever goal they had identified. So it went really well. I mean, we're 2 decades in the business. If money is your qualifier for success, I mean, we did about $97 million in personal training sales. We generated about $50 million a year through ourselves and our alumni in our city. And we continue to do that. And more importantly, and most importantly, we donated $6.5 million to charity, most going to youth sports. And we positively impacted thousands of lives. So really great run, really great business, did it for 2 decades, just sold last year. And really halfway through that, I got into the youth sports space. And guess what? Found out it was like the celebrity trainers. It was the celebrity coaches. And so I would show up and see, teams that were formed and one team at one fond memory was our kids were 9 years old and we showed up to the Little League baseball and there was this one team every year that would just crush every other team 25-2, and they'd have the all-star dream team at 7, 8, and 9. And I just said, okay, hang on a second. What's happening here? Why are we doing this? Who is getting any benefit from this? And that's really what tipped my interest in the youth sports system. So really immersed myself in the lectures and conferences and listening to the academia. What is physical literacy? Got myself on a couple boards, both provincially and nationally, and then really started to take an interest in the activation and accountability to all of these great concepts that we were talking about. So, as you know, we're not short on information and education on what should be happening and why in the youth sports system. We got that. You could turn on anything and you can see that. Where we fall short is the activation and accountability to what we're saying. And in my learning, I've come to think that there's an opportunity, because a lot of it is academia, and academia absolutely has a place. We do the research, we have the evidence-based findings. But what I wish is that when it came time for solutions, the academics would open up the table to marketers, behavior change people, because that's where I think we're really going to get the gains. I use the analogy of building a house. How many people does it take to build a house? You got your site inspector, you got your architect, you got your general contractor, you got all your contractors, and then at the end you got your landscaper, and you got your designers, and you got the people that come and inspect. That's 7 to 8 people to build a house. Each one of them does a different role specifically. For example, you would never see the site inspector at the beginning of the stage shoveling the topsoil into the garden at the end of the stage. We seem to do that in sport. We seem to have the academic and the researchers that have come up with some of the problems and solutions try to be the same people that implement them at the grassroots level. And it doesn't work. It falls short. So really, I think that the business background, and that's why I started off with that, enabled us to say, okay, we've done this. We've gone into communities. We've activated this stuff. We've actually brought it through to fruition. We know it's not easy. We're here to help. But it seems like everyone wants to kind of own it. Everyone wants to own the flag, and we solve the sport problem. We solve the obesity problem. Here's our silver bullet. And guess what? Here we are. So long and short of it, wrap this up. Really, we got called by the United States Olympic Committee to develop their activation and accountability framework for their athlete development model. And we built that out just before the gymnastics scandal hit. We've been to Norway. We've spoken to their federations, many of their federations, about really how do we ensure the value is not missing at the grassroots level of sport? How do we ensure that that value is there for young boys and girls to really develop a lifelong interest and develop a passion and an excitement and an enthusiasm and a habit of good quality sport? And that's where we are today.
I mean, wow. I mean, that's a fascinating and really interesting journey. I mean, just to circle back, I mean, I guess what was the catalyst that got you into the youth sports space in the first place and make you want to essentially, I suppose, use many of the skills and attributes that you've gained from the career within that personal training space and building that up, and I guess transfer that across and do some similar things in the youth sports space? But what was it actually that got you involved in the first place? Was it your own kids getting involved, or, it's because, to be honest, it's not like, I know the economic model in the States is different from it is over in the UK, but generally speaking, there's not the same amount of revenue to be generated. No one's making an enormous living out of youth sport. So what made you get there, and kind of what was the catalyst, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the catalyst, great question. I think the catalyst was seeing the ramifications of a poorly run organization and poorly run systems, and absolutely was from my kids. If I didn't have kids and we weren't in it, I wouldn't have guessed it. And it was right from hockey to soccer to baseball to basketball to everything. Everywhere we went, it was the same story.
Wow.
And it was a story of people, not young kids, not wanting to play anymore because it wasn't fun. And that story to me was so foreign. Sports, that's all sports is supposed to be. Sports is it's fun. It's a dress rehearsal for real life. We're going to learn things like communication, feedback, goals, winning, losing in a really controlled, friendly environment where if we fail, it's no problem. We're propped up. We're still going for the same popsicle afterwards. We're still hanging around with our mates right after and doing something at the water park. It's turned into something different. It's turned into business, like you said. And again, the cost of winning, what is the impact the cost of winning is having on these young kids? It doesn't, I don't need to make something up. We know it's the decline in youth sport is huge. And that's not the only reason for it. I'm sure we'll get into that later, but that's really what compelled me to say, hey, listen, more people need to do something. And there's a lot of good and great people that are doing things. We need to get them together and collaborate and do what we tell our teams to cooperate and bring their expertise, knowledge, and skill sets together and share the messages and share some solutions and build a better system.
So, your point about, I guess, the academics and the research and the message not landing, that's actually a really, I think, important one, particularly given from you being in Canada, because I would argue that Canada is one of the leading nations in the world for academic research into youth sports participation. I mean, you've got some leading lights over there, Jean Cote, Joe Baker, people like that over there. And some of your universities, Canada was where much of the long-term athlete development stuff came from. But so you've got the knowledge, like you say, that's not translating into action. Where do you see other, and you're working on this thing that you've referred to as an activation accountability framework. So from my perspective, where's the disconnect, and what can be done to begin to tackle some of the challenges that are being faced?
Yeah, what a great question that is, isn't it? That's really the billion-dollar question. I think the disconnect. I think the disconnect is that it's one thing to come up with concepts and constructs and framework, and I'm not poo-pooing the research and academics. And you're right, we have done so much great work, and there's so much, excellent, such a wide body of knowledge and interest here, but it's not translating. So a good friend of mine says, when does what we know change what we do? In my opinion, if there's no governance or structure that we're willing to have, there's no leader. In my opinion, there's no leadership in sport. There's no leading, authority in sport. And I'll default to this. We were speaking at the United States Olympic Committee's first annual youth sport summit last December, and I was listening to NGBs and national governing bodies. They were there to learn and listen, and they wanted help from the United States Olympic Committee on a variety of topics, like, listen, how do we solve this? How do we do this? So they bring in speakers and they do that. And of course, I was the only Canadian in the room, and I raised my hand and I said to the presenter at the stage, I said, hey, listen, is sport a big business in the United States? And the room chuckled, oh, Canadian, naive Canadian. And they said, absolutely, Matt. It's between $2 and $7 billion a year. And I said, great, who's in charge? And there was dead silence. And, the reason I asked the question was, I said, because I'm listening to national governing bodies who I'm assuming are all here to get knowledge and get expertise from somebody who I'm assuming is the top level, organization. And I said, and I'm coming from a franchisor-franchisee relationship. So I was the franchisor in our fitness business. And basically, we didn't just let our franchisees develop their own websites. Why? Because they would be off-brand. The language is not consistent. The colors are different. One organization may be better funded or smarter than the other, so one looks better than the other. You'd never do that in a franchisor-franchisee relationship. As the franchisor, my responsibility was to provide the operating manual and support for quality business and assurance. Right from here's how you do it. It was basically an operating manual. We don't have that in sport. We don't have that in sport. We don't have that in the United States. We don't have that in Canada. We don't have that anywhere. So what has to happen, circling all the way back to your question, is we have to keep doing the research, keep doing this wide body of hey, if you do it this way, it'll work. But at the end of the day, there's nobody to say, hey, wait a second, what you're doing is incorrect. you are no longer allowed to do that. There's nobody that's going to shut the doors or pull the permit or make sure people are in compliance. Zero governance. We have zero governance in sport.
So now you're going to get me on an interesting sub tangent, but I love this. I don't want to get too political about this, but I wonder if there's a dimension to this. So I would say that Canada and the UK have a little bit of a similarity in terms of their kind of political outlook, in the sense that, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, in the sense that both countries, I guess, are liberal democracies but are liberal democracies that are happy to have an amount of government regulation over the activities that we take place. We're not entirely don't entirely like the free market to take everything else, whereas the US is different. They're very, very kind of bought into the idea of free market economics being a huge driver, and that's clearly happened in the youth sport space. Free market economics has basically just been left wild with no regulation, and like you say, there's no. And I imagine even if there was an attempt to bring in some, and maybe attempts have been brought in to bring in regulation, and it is rejected roundly as being, kind of communist, almost socialist claptrap. So do you feel like you and I, you in Canada, me in the UK, to us this this is crazy, this wouldn't make sense, but in the US it's a different proposition to try and bring about change there. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, I know you have your problems in Canada and I know we've got our problems in the UK, so it's not as if we don't have similar problems, but I'm just wondering whether the US is a different animal in terms of how we tackle this problem.
A slightly different animal. We're talking chipmunk to wildebeest. Yeah. Yes, it is a slightly different animal because free market capitalism is starting to cannibalize the youth sports system. And you're absolutely right. Canada does not have the economic driver around sport that the United States does. I mean, nobody does sport better than the US. You look at the college football, you look at pretty much everything. If there's a way to monetize it in TV rights and revenues and entertainment, the US is leading that way in doing it. Now, that doesn't mean it's all evil and bad. It just means that without regulation, you can only keep going up and up and up and up and up for so long before it's got to start coming down. Yeah. But as long as it's not on someone's watch, as long as it's on your watch, you don't care. The value proposition becomes the shareholder, not the sport participant.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is where things start to get really dangerous. In Canada, we're just not there. So of course we wouldn't do it because, all of our provincial sport organizations are underfunded, understaffed, under budget. To even conceive that someone could come in and say, hey, listen, we're going to have a sport regulatory body or oversight committee is probably wouldn't happen unless you had some real sport-minded government in place to say this is a priority and we get it. More active citizens, all the stuff we know. I mean, the active, the physical, the mental. Instead of investing upstream in grassroots sport, we're gonna invest downstream in opioid crisis and mental health issues and all that stuff, and wonder why it's happening. And I'm not suggesting that it's a linear connection between, hey, listen, if you do sports, you're not going to be hooked on opioids. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is there are so many things that we could be doing better from an upstream, proactive measure, but those aren't what gets the headlines when you're coming up for re-election. Sure. What comes up is I'm putting more hospital beds in your community. I'm doing this. So we're very downstream after the fact focus. I don't know that that's going to change anytime soon. And I'm concerned, like you are, that, are we going to have to see the sports system tank and fall right out before we actually start taking this more seriously?
Well, I suppose if the way of measuring the system is the one egg in the bag that doesn't break, making it to the top as a professional athlete, and there's a constant oversupply of individuals making it as a professional athlete, the incentive structure for organizations to change the model is pretty, it doesn't necessarily work, does it? Because from their perspective, I guess, and certainly I see this happening in soccer over here, I guess that the argument, I think some probably quietly don't know, I'm speculating a little now, but I'll go with this because it's, some are thinking, well, if that's the cost, if the wasteland of low participation and activity, long-term activity, if the wasteland is the cost of the production of the one star, they'll take it. And I'm worried that's potentially the driver here. And until I think either a movement, and this is where we can begin to segue into the work you're doing in terms of the filmmaking, but in the unless there's a kind of groundswell and almost like a public movement similar to the kind of movement that's happening with things like climate change. And I don't know if it's happening so much in the US and Canada, but over here, what single-use plastics are terrible and all those sorts of things. So it becomes a movement that people are driving themselves until that begins to happen, or government regulation comes in, like we've currently got a sugar tax now. So sugary soft drinks are starting to be phased out because, and actually, if you're a manufacturer and you sell sugary soft drinks, that money goes into sports participation activity, which is a really positive use of taxation. Mm-hmm. And so you either, maybe both. Maybe you're going to get this movement, and you're also then going to get a change of public policy. But unless those two things happen, the danger here is that there's a continuation of this ongoing process where basically we just say, well, kids are no longer participating in sport. We're going to get sicker, fatter, unhealthier. But as long as we've got a few elites for everybody to watch on the TV while they sit there being sick, then it's all good. So that's my slight concern here.
Well, and hey, listen, you hit the nail right in the head. You've nailed it. That's exactly what's happening. And you're also, I totally agree with you in terms of the top down, bottom up. What you're saying is like, look at, if it's not legislated from the top down and it doesn't come from a movement on the bottom up, we're in trouble, and we are in trouble. But when is it going to be the breaking point, I guess? I guess that's your question, and it's a really good question. When is the breaking point? We know the funnel is shrinking. So the funnel is shrinking. It used to be wide. We had a wide base of development, and then we had people, and it wasn't only that they were going for high-performance sport, but as they went up the funnel, some of them got into officiating or administration or broadcasting, or they wanted to be in and around sport. But if we cut that funnel down and start shrinking it, we've got less for all of the sport opportunities, not just the high-performing athletes. And then what we're going to see from the high-performing athletes is we're not going to get the best players. We're going to get the players that could afford to go to the academies and go to all of these places. So we're not getting the best talent. We're not watching the best talent. We're just watching the best of what's left, through the war of attrition. And I'm talking more so in Canada and North America than I am in UK and Europe. Because your academy systems are set up much differently, and your club systems are set up much differently than ours. So that reference is more to us. You probably are still getting the better and the best players that are funneling through the system. But will the entertainment value always be there? I don't know. It's going strong right now, but will that continue indefinitely? I don't know. At some point, who's going to the cost of these multi-million-dollar contracts is got to be born on somebody, and that's going to be the viewer. And in the United States, what we see is baseball, for example, less people are going to the parks. Parks are empty because it's just not affordable anymore. And so what people are doing is they're watching it on TV. Well, is that okay? Are we taking away that experience? Will there be one day where we just watch sports on TV and we don't attend live because we can't? So a lot of interesting ramifications from what you're saying, but I getting back to your point, I completely agree with you. It's got to be a sustained movement from the bottom with the desire and will at the top to go, hey, this is important. We've got to start just ratcheting in just a little bit. It doesn't have to be a radical reform overnight, but it just has to be, for the safety of the athletes and for the sustainability and of vibrant, healthy communities.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? So it's something that occurred to me earlier with what you were talking about. Firstly, when you were talking about running a kind of personal training business, and then you said $97 million. My mouth opened up. But I think what you then went on to explain is you ran that through kind of a franchise model, and then you just explained. And I think this is something that I just really wanted to pick up on because I thought it was fantastic is one of the things you understood about the idea of a franchise model is a consistency. And you talked about the operating manual and this, that, and the other, because you've recognized quite quickly that your product is customer experience. And what I think a lot of governing bodies haven't twigged onto is that their product is the experience. The product's not the output, as in X number of players moving through a talent system, right, at whatever cost. The product is customer experience. The byproduct of that is better players coming through a talent system. A, you have a bigger talent pool, and B, you have higher quality. So it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. You don't have to create this uber attritional talent development system in order to produce high-quality athletes at the end. The two things can go hand in glove. You can provide a fantastic experience for young athletes that keeps them into a lifelong sports participation experience. They have an amazing time. They get all the other social, and you get all these other health, social, cohesive benefits and all those sorts of outcomes. But at the same time, you will also develop a better athlete. Now, people don't get this. But what's great about what you were doing is you saw and clearly benefited economically from the perspective of saying, right, we're about an experience that's based on what that customer wants and what they need, right? And we're going to make sure that everywhere we go, the people at the front line of delivering that customer experience are going to know exactly what that customer experience needs to be, because any deviation at all in that customer experience is where we're going to lose people, and we lose retention. And the minute we lose retention is the minute the business starts to fall apart. Governing bodies of sport need to think in those terms, and then everything gets better for everybody.
100%. Could not agree more.
Even the dog in the background's agreeing with me, I think.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Couldn't agree more. And it is about the experience, and it's about everyone's going to have the experience. It's going to elevate the whole thing. I agree. And what I always say is, I always ask the question, what's the first thing that you do when you get a puzzle? What's the first thing that you do? You take the cover off the puzzle and you set it up so that you're looking at your finished product, right? And then you dish in and you have the pieces.
Yeah.
We have never ever shown what a quality sport experience should look like.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever shown that. No one's ever said this is what a quality sport experience should look like. Oh, and by the way, inside the box, here are the pieces. I am a new sport parent. I am a returning sport parent. I am a high performance sport parent. Not all the athletes are in there. So not all the stakeholders are in there. If you look at the sport stakeholders, there's athletes, parents, educators, officials, coaches, and sport organization administration. There's 6 people, and they're at varying points in their journey, new to, returning, or high performance focused. Yeah. So that's 6 by 3. So those are the puzzle pieces. We've never actually given that to an organization or spelled it out and said, this is what it should look like. We've done a great job in operating in our silos. We've done a great job at saying, hey, listen, this group over here, they're unbelievable at parent education. Go there. And then we go there and we're like, okay, parents, they're the problem. But you can have the best parent education you want. If you got a crappy coach, it doesn't matter. If you got disengaged athletes who don't know what their responsibility is to their quality sport experience, it doesn't matter. If you got an organization or club that doesn't give a crap about anything except for getting that 1 or 2 players that goes on so they can hang the jersey on the wall and say developed here, then it doesn't matter. We do not. It's interesting to me that we don't do at the organizational level what we ask every single kid that plays a sport to do. Teamwork, communication. We don't together collaborate, selflessness. We don't do that at our level, and then we wonder why it's falling apart.
Yeah, and I think I've been saying this at length actually on that point around collaboration. I mean, some of that's to do, I think, with the fact that the incentive structures sometimes have not quite worked. I've been fortunate enough in my career to have roles that have required me to work both within sports governing bodies, but also to work across sports governing bodies. And one of the things that I see quite a lot is, firstly, there is kind of short-term policy making. That's to do with, kind of some of the government stuff. But let's say, you've got a 4-year policy cycle, and there's been lengthy periods of time where the number of participants that you have, or the growth rate that you have, is a measure. It's a measure of success, and funding is determined on that. But the problem with that is that puts governing bodies in competition with each other, or at least they think they are. And so they're all saying, no, you can't have that participant because, I'm keeping them. So then seasons get longer, and we have, and we don't want them to lose them to the other sports and all those sorts of things. Whereas actually the measure should be the exact opposite. And so my perspective is that so sometimes the policymakers, it's an unintended consequence that happens. But I think one of the other issues for me is we. And I think this is it's a slightly different model again. I think in the US, because it's so much of it is done outside of a governing body system. But in terms of the way the policymakers create policy, what I don't think they're looking at is to say these are the core ingredients of that experience, and if you deviate from that experience, you are no longer considered to be suitable as a environment that we would recommend. You're not able to receive funding, you're not able to, or whatever it might be, whatever levers you want to do. And that means they can go off and do what they want. Like we have travel agents. So for example, they have their badge that says that they're they're kind of like ABTA. It basically means that they're recognized as a quality travel agent. If something goes wrong, they're there, and there's some support and backup. So you as a consumer have a choice. You can go there, or you can take your chance with some other person. And we almost need the same sort of thing. You need like a quality mark for a sports organization, whether it's a local one or whatever it is, that says this is an organization that abides by and adheres to a code of, whether it's sports governance, whatever it is, that means that they're going to put the participant first, and that's going to be one of their primary functions. Now, you don't have to go there if you don't want to, but they're the ones that we are recommending that you go to. Now, I've been in organizations that have been reluctant to do that, because what they don't want to do is to put clubs, if you like, kind of in competition with each other. But my view is they're in competition with each other anyway. So let's at least make them in competition with each other for the right things.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you're right. It's a Six Sigma standard of excellence.
Yeah.
We have it for our workplace. We have it, as you just described, for the travel agents. We have it for everything else. It's not like we have to reinvent the wheel here. The formula for success here need not be reinvented. It need to be implemented. And there's enough smart people around that could say, hey, listen, this is the first step that we're going to take. It's a baby one, but at least it's better than just letting everyone do their own thing, because that is proven ineffective. This is the first step, and we're going to, you're going to have Six Sigma standard of excellence for your club. You will be recognized by this body, and like you said, this is, you will be we're not going to, throw mud at other clubs, but what we're going to do is say these are the clubs that are Six Sigma, quality certified. Not hard to do.
So the customer experience bit, I think, is a really important point to make. But just flicking around again to where we were going before I took us back, around this idea of this kind of movement. So as part of that, you've obviously taken it upon yourself to produce a film. Were you a director, producer, writer? Talk me through the whole journey, the genesis of the movie.
Yeah. So the genesis of the movie is this. We're in sales, and if anyone's in sales, we all have a job, so that means we're in sales.
Yeah.
So in order to make a sale, there has to be between 6 and 20 points of contact. When you look at how Apple does, and they're the best in the world at doing this, nobody walked to the door and said, hey, listen, I need to drop $700 on an iPhone because it makes sense. No, it doesn't make sense. We saw a Super Bowl ad. We're driving by the bus stop, and there was something on the bus stop. It was an Apple. We saw a commercial that was super profound, and it piqued our interest. Our kids came to us and they said, hey, Stu, here's where all the pictures are. You need this phone, and it has all your pictures on it. The music was on it. So it was between 6 and 20 points of subliminal messaging before we actually were sold on that message. So what's our message in sport? Quality sport experiences. What are some of the levers that we can pull to get people to understand what is and isn't a quality sport experience? What should and shouldn't you expect? Yeah, there's the websites. Yeah, there's articles and periodicals, and there's journals and etc. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to go to the end game. We wanted to go to some of the best and biggest and most successful organizations in the world so that people could hear it from them. And I'm not sure, are you married?
Yes.
Okay, so if you tell your wife the same thing or she tells you, whatever, you're not listening. If if I go in and tell your wife something and hear a message, she comes to you and goes, "Oh, you'll never guess what Matt said." I mean, that happens all the time, right? So you got your familiarity biases, is my point there. So having other people say the same messages, the director of the Ohio State, the athletic director of Ohio State, arguably one of the top 5 colleges in the U.S., saying, "Hey, listen, we're concerned about how people are showing up." I just read today they just doubled their psychologists for their athletes, doubled. And is that going to be a trend that carries forward? So clearly there's big issues. The United States Olympic Committee is saying, "Hey, yeah, we're doing well here, but we're really concerned about what's happening at the grassroots level because, like you just said, people are quitting because they're not enjoying their experiences." Norway just cleaned up at the Winter Olympics. They're starting to have the whole soccer sport specialization and the grabbing of kids and bringing kids into one sport and hoarding and coveting them. So by going around to all of these top level organizations and athletes and listening to some of the parents and some of the kids themselves, we were able to get, right from the horse's mouth. Hey, there's an athlete there. He's 15 years old. When he started on a team of 17 kids. Now he's the last kid there. All the other kids have quit. So that's a powerful message, and it's a message that people can start to resonate with and say, "Hey, listen, this isn't just, Stu talking, Matt talking, Mike talking, Joe, Sarah, Sally. This is happening." And that's really what we wanted to achieve through that. Just, documentaries are supposed to be produced as such that we're not supposed to be describing. We just let it go, and then we let the audience draw from it what they want.
And so in terms of like the process of pulling it together and kind of how you went about that, I mean, it's a great piece of work. And like you say, one of the great things about it is you've got such a rich and diverse set of voices. You've got the primary school teacher, you've got the gymnastics individual coach who's saying, we need movement literacy to be prized as much as mathematical and reading and writing, and all those sorts of things. But you've then got the performance director of Norwegian ski jumping. It's a very diverse group of individuals, and so how you even go about kind of pulling that together? What's the story there?
Yeah, well, we had the pleasure of working with a lot of these people in groups, and we kept hearing the same things, and they all wanted they all want to provide the same message, which is the message that you're sharing right now. Quality sport experience. The more people we have quality sport experience, the better they come to these universities. The more people we have for the higher performance, the less injured they are. All the great things that we already know. We had the pleasure of working with all these groups, and we said, "Hey, would you be willing to go on camera to speak about this?" Because everyone thinks that this conversation is specific to their geography. Well, this is a UK thing, or this is a Canada thing, or this is just my association this is happening. No, this is happening globally. So this is a global, I won't go to the length of saying global epidemic, but we are going to start dipping into that word pretty soon, because quite frankly, it's, just like we're talking, it's, unless these things happen from the top and bottom, it's not just going to fix itself. So these groups and people were more than happy to come on board and say, "Hey, listen, yeah, we'd absolutely like to lend our voice and lend our opinion to this piece of work." And we got really fortunate that we had great people, and they allowed us to come into their facilities and come into their countries, and in the case of New Zealand, they got their own film crew, and they sent the video, and now they're using that video for every kind of preseason meeting that they're having in some of their sports clubs. That is what's the front and center piece. I know in Canada, the Soccer Canada is using that video at the beginning of every C license. So the lowest license that we can get for soccer for volunteer parents, just to start to get that mindset. And like you talked about, the movement and the mentality going, okay, hey, what is this about? And what can I do to ensure that I have a quality sport experience? And now they've built their whole C license around creating those quality sport experiences. as has the United States Olympic Committee and Nike. They got together how to coach kids for just something for volunteer coaches that are just volunteering their time, that, the least amount of time to watch, just to say, listen, it's not about the trouncing and victory. It's about the lifelong enjoyment of the game, particularly at those lower age groups. So we were lucky to have all those people on board.
And I guess if you had a kind of message for the people who are, off the back of this, they kind of go over and they want to check it out, and they're going to look at the film and all that sort of stuff. I mean, first and foremost, if they haven't heard of it already, where can they find it? And then secondly, what is your message to them in terms of what you would like them to do with it?
A really good question. Thanks for asking that. So the film is called The Cost of Winning. You can Google it. It will be up on any Google search. I mean, you've shared it on your site. Thank you very much. They can find it on my sites, on any of my social media. Matt Young 101 is my Twitter handle. I'm quite direct about sports, what's going right and what's going wrong. I don't need to be right. I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always learning. I don't think I have all the answers, but I'm not afraid to call it out as I see it. But anyway, what message would we like to take away? What would we like them to do with it? So first of all, it's 24 minutes. We want them to watch it, and then after they watch it, we want them to have a conversation. So we didn't want it to be an hour long where people got disengaged. We want it to be short enough where that in a 1 hour time frame. Ideally, this is something that's shown at the beginning of every season in every sport environment that you're in. You take the hour, you have a mandatory preseason meeting. Athletes are there, parents are there, officials are there, coaches are there, sport organization administration is there. You show the meeting, you have a discussion. And, it's always interesting. You just let the discussion happen because people will ask questions and they'll have grievances. You have a moderator and you, at the end, come to a consensus. This is what we're doing as a sport organization. To your point earlier, so with this, are we all in agreement? Yay, nay? Okay, perfect. Well, then this is what we're going to be doing then. This is what you should expect. This is what happens when you don't get that. And you've had that discussion at the outset rather than, again, reacting every single time the placements happen and the wins or losses start piling up or whatever goes wrong in the sports season. So we really want people to discuss it, have a conversation, come to their own consensus and conclusion, whatever they want to take from the message, and then do. So moving from talking to doing.
I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, that's, I think, a really important thing, which is I quite often, when I'm working with groups of coaches particularly, they often will come up with challenges that they face with systemic issues, selection decisions, or what happens above them in the next stage of the pathway, or policy decisions that come around through competitive structures and there's nothing they can do about. And I say, yeah, but there's stuff you can do. There's stuff you can't change, but the stuff you can. So why don't you just do the stuff you can, and rather than just throwing your hands up in the air and say, oh, well, we're doomed because the whole system's broken, so therefore we may as well just do nothing.
100%.
So, I mean, and that can't be good enough. Now, yeah, okay, you're doing your bit working with, organizations like, USOC, and there are other policymakers in other parts of the world who are very, very aware of this kind of thing, who are, making their own mark. I mean, I know, the guys that I do quite a bit with the guys at, USA ice hockey, and they're doing some really exciting things there, and they're seeing some increases in participation as a result. So, they're being brave, they're taking the steps out there, and that's happening from the top down, but from the bottom up, we can also take steps as well. And the key bit for me, I think, is, and I think that's a really important point, it doesn't have to be a huge change. It can be one thing. It doesn't make any difference. But if the and the way I would do it is, for example, I convene quite often these communities of practice or communities of learning. So, send the film out beforehand as a stimulus, a bit like a book club, get people to watch it, come together, right, what did you take away? What are the things that you want to talk about? Let's explore them and then work out what our plan of action might be as a result of that. That would be a fantastic use. And of course, I also would also implore anybody who goes to share it, because the more we can get people out there seeing, reading, listening, and actually watching watching what you've provided, because like you say, it's very accessible, the more likely we are then to stimulate these kinds of conversations. And again, we can slowly but surely begin to bring about that kind of change. We're only going to make one minor change to the sports experience, and I tell you what, you can see some absolutely huge differences in retention levels.
Yeah, no question. And I really like what you're saying in terms of just start small, just start somewhere, because that's really what it's all about. So and again, what happens typically is that you get the people that watch it that are already converted. And they're not the people that need to watch it, but the people that do watch it and go, see, exactly. And then you get those people that are like, well, you're not going to convert it. And I think it was like someone said the 20, John Maxwell, 25% are on board, 50% are undecided, 25% will never come on board no matter what you say or do. So your sole objective is to keep those 25% away from the 50% so you can convert them to the upper level. And it's really sage advice. And we've had lots of great responses. I mean, it was shown at the Lithuanian Olympic Education Forum. This documentary has been shown around the world. We held off from just releasing it in social media because we really wanted the conversations. So we facilitated a lot of those conversations, and we've written out a document. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So we've written out a full document. This is how you can have the conversations. These are some of the questions that you can ask. We've got the posters. We've got everything set up. So, and if you follow that link, the cost of winning right through to potential pictures will provide you with all of that stuff that you need if you don't know how to have a conversation. So thanks for making sure that you highlighted that because it's important. But getting back to your point, grassroots level, groundswell, getting it up. One thing, I like what you said, just do one thing. I will tell you one of the biggest and most effective things that I have seen done is a mandatory preseason meeting. And so one of the things that we've been working on is how to operationalize long-term athlete development, or ADM, in your club. And so what we've done is, because as you know, it's a behavior change process. And so we've actually, through our experience dealing with the different clubs, what are your pain points? And they go, okay, onboarding people. How do we onboard people? And we go, okay, who are all the stakeholders? And again, I go back to that, the athlete, who we never actually even engage, no matter how old they are. We barely engage the athletes because we think they're kids. So they're not even in their own equation. So you can't have a good experience if you're not the driver of your own experience and you don't know what to expect. Then we've got the parents. Okay, so, and what do we know about the athletes? We've asked them. It's been done. Studies have been done. What do they value? Fun, friends, fair play, friendly competition, finish the season better than we started. 5 things. It's not rocket science. So at the end of the season, 0 to 10, send out the questionnaire to the athletes, not the parents, to the athletes. 0 to 10, how did we do across fun, friends, fair play, friendly competition, and finishing the season? Let them give you the answer. Once you've got that answer, then you can actually implement things and say, thank you, based on what you've shared, here's what we're going to do next. Parents, what do they value? Well, they value development, safety, fair play, competition, and opportunity. So if we know what they value, 1 to 10, how did we do? Coaches, support, competition, fostering a love of the game for the kids. We know we've already got all this information. Now, what do we do with that information? So what we tell organizations is step 1 is a preseason or end of the season questionnaire. You tell us how we did, get those numbers, and then go based on those numbers, turn back and say, okay, based on your numbers, we are implementing X, Y, and Z, 1, 2, or 3 this year to create a more friendly environment and meet your needs per stakeholder for a better experience. So that's step 1. Step 2, preseason meeting, mandatory. So someone asked me, he said, hey, Matt, how much is it for you to come and do a parent meeting? Because we got a big problem with the parents. I'm like, okay, when is it? Next Thursday. Perfect. Is it mandatory? Nope. Is there any other days that people can come? Nope. Just Thursday. Great. Are any other stakeholders attending? Nope. Just parents. Okay, great. Then it'll be $5,000 an hour. Holy smokes. Well, why so expensive? I go, because you're wasting your time and my time. I go, but if you're going to give parents 2 options to attend, or also if you're going to make it mandatory attendance, if you're going to make it mandatory that all stakeholders are there, why wouldn't you set your season up like that? And I'll do it for $250 if you're going to do all that. So what happened was they all came and they all sat in a meeting, And the first question I asked the kids was, why do you play? And they all went around the room and they said things like fun, friends, all the things that we know. They had already said, and blah, 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 blah. So then I asked one kid, I go, who's your dad? And I could see this guy cowering in the back, and he goes, that's my dad right there. And I said, how are you supporting what they just said? And he gave an answer. And then I asked other parents, and they're like, we drop them off. We make sure. Perfect. And I go, you got a 12-word sport parent vocabulary for the season, 12 words total. 2 when they get out of the car, have fun. 7 when they get back into the car, I just love to watch you play. And 3 on the weekends when they're saying, I'm bored or I don't know what to do, just go play. That's your 12-word parent sport vocabulary. And then and I made them say it. So after I said it, they said it back to me. But and we're laughing right now, but this happened in the context of the administrators, the coaches, the kids, and the parents. And so then I asked the kid, I go, okay, great. After we talked about it with the parents, we went around the room and we said, okay, well, what do you want? What do you value? And we went around the room, and then one guy said development. And I go, hey, great. What does that mean? And he goes, well, they get better at the end of the season than they did at the beginning. I go, better at what? And he goes, well, better at the skills. And I go, okay, so how do you know if they got better at the skills? And he goes, well, I don't know, actually. It's the eyeball test. And I go, that's not good enough, because we have to stop throwing the word athlete development around where we're not taking a baseline, a mid-season or end of the season evaluation. We have to stop throwing that word development around, because what we're doing by saying development is we're defaulting to the standing, the score, and the schedule. We're defaulting to that as the measure of athlete development. And that's got nothing to do with athlete development. You could have a team that you tier up because you want them to get a better experience. They could lose every single game of the season, but at the beginning they lost 6-1, and at the end, they're losing the soccer match 2-1. That could be unbelievable development. But if they've never won, the parents would go, well, we never won a game all year. This was a waste of season. That's not necessarily true. So what we say is, we're doing an athlete assessment at the beginning of the season. And then we go through this whole process. Like, what are the 4 C's? Competence, confidence, character, and connection. So we got four C's to development. The competence is the physical and technical tactical. The confidence is the resilience, self-worth, self-belief. The connection is the social emotional. So relationships with teammates, having fun, doing what is right. And the character is all the focus, work ethic, game sense, etc. If we're not breaking down those 4 C's in a manner that makes sense to the participants, we are shortchanging them on athlete development and their experience. Whereas if we actually are intentional and go, here's what we're measuring, here's what it means, here's what happens, we're going to do it preseason, midseason, and end of season, and you're actually going to get a report card. In addition to the score and the schedule and the standings, you're going to get a personal kind of update on your development. Do you think that's value? Do you think that's adding value to the players? Of course it is. It's adding value, but we don't do that. So at this mandatory preseason meeting, we have those discussions. We talk about what's going to happen. And interestingly, after we introduced the 12-word sport vocabulary, I went back to one of the kids and I said, so what happens when you get in the car and your dad says, why did you pass that ball? Why did you cross it? You should have just dribbled down the field and took a shot on goal. And the kid goes, that's exactly what my dad says all the time in the meeting. So dad's cringing in the background. Could have been mom, could have been dad. It doesn't matter. And so then we say to the kids, who is the only person that you listen to on this team? And every single one of them pointed to the coach. And we said, perfect. And then we went through, last thing I'll say is we went through kind of what are the big factors for the decrease in participation in sport. There's 6. Number 1 is lack of free play. So the lack of free play, and again, it's more than just going out and playing and discovering and doing that. You're making critical neural synapses. That's what you're developing, the connection when you're going out and free, problem solving, all the stuff that you need that we're now seeing with the kids that don't have it showing up with anxiety, depression, all of these things that I'm a firm believer. Again, it's not just as linear as it, I'm not trying to say there's not other factors, but that lack of free play is huge. So if we don't have lack of free play, then we don't get into the number 2, fundamental movement skills, run, jump, kick, catch, two-handed strike, throw. We don't have fundamental movement skills anymore. So if we're not playing by ourselves, we can't develop those fundamental movement skills. If we can't develop those fundamental movement skills, we decrease our chance in developing the fundamental sports skills. And we're having less and less people feel confident or competent when it comes time to move on from elementary school to that next level. Then we've got the whole marginalization of physical education. I mean, physical education, because again, it doesn't have every other subject. You write a test at the beginning, you get a curriculum, you rewrite the test to determine if you absorb that curriculum, and then you get a mark. In phys ed, you get an A because you showed up. I get an A because I'm the fastest guy running around the schoolyard. That's got nothing to do with how we progressed across those fundamental movement skills or motor skill development. Nothing. We need to relook at how we're going to do that more than just, from a social, emotional perspective, from a medical perspective, health perspective, etc. Technology. So basically, we all know what that's doing. It's basically technology. $43 million on Fortnite. Divided by how many winners there were. A kid from Canada won $3 million in Fortnite. Well, good luck trying to get him to go out and work his tail off to make a team when he can sit at home and make $3 million being the Fortnite champion. I mean,
and nobody shouts at him when he gets it wrong.
Nobody shout. Just press restart when he fails. He can die, come back, whatever the case may be. So technology, and then you got the early sport specialization, and that's really what the cost of winning hit. Everyone trying to get all their kids into one sport, thinking that if they're not in the spring camp, if they're not all year round, they're losing. I can tell you from personal experience, I have fought with parents not to specialize who were specializing, and the results were unbelievable. Their kids made higher levels the next year because they missed the game, they missed the sport, they had different skill sets, they learned different motor patterns from playing different sports. I mean, it's as clear as day, but again, ego and FOMO, two primary human motivators, fear of missing out and ego. We got to have our kids there. We don't want to let them behind, let them fail. And nobody says after the fact, oh man, I really screwed that up. And then the last one is cost. Like the middle class in the world is either going way up or way down. The same thing in sport. We're pricing out the middle and lower class of sport. So when we talk about that in that mandatory preseason meeting, we're arming the parents and kids with a lot of knowledge. So when we talk about technology, I say to the kids, hey, listen, who has their cell phones in the room overnight? And 50% of them put up their hand. These kids are 10 years old. I'm like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You got to shut your cell phone off at least an hour before you go to bed, or you're going to be perpetually fatigued. And then you get up and you're filling yourself with orange juice and cereal. Like we don't even give them a chance in some cases. So anyway, I'm dragging on. But my point is the number one thing in making that change was that mandatory preseason meeting. And what we did was we canned it, we filmed it, we put the slides into a PowerPoint so that anyone could use it. Now we give it to everybody, and we say, if you want to do one thing to change the sport experience, start by bringing all the stakeholders together at the beginning of the season and have the conversation. And then, of course, we use the cost of winning documentary, watch this before, or we send it out as a follow-up because it reinforces that message. So back to what I was saying in terms of sales, 6 points of contact, right? You got all the stakeholders there. So they're all there listening to the message. You're there in person. So you've got the high touch, the tactile, the tone, everything's going off. You got the email follow-ups, you got the video. So now you're actually setting yourself up for a greater chance of the message being received than basically, the season starts, you're out of the gates, and all hell's breaking loose. And to your point, everyone's going, oh man, we can't even change this, or this. Well, you haven't really put much thought into it. So that is one thing I would recommend. And going all the way back to your point, that's just one thing that you can do. One. And if you just did that, you would save so much headache, so much heartache, and you'd have you create better sport experiences.
I think the single biggest, hey, listen, and never fear for going off on a rant. I mean, if there's anything that this podcast is for, it's for people going off on a rant, and I am the biggest advocate or the biggest exponent of going off on rants. So I love it. I absolutely love it. There's quite a lot of things I want to pick up on there, but the one just to start there was, I can imagine, right? So what this the single biggest kind of question or issue or whatever it is that I get in terms of people contacting me. There's a report going to be coming out. There's a kind of new sports app that's come out of Norway. Interestingly enough, it's very big in Norway and actually got quite a big foothold in the UK, which is it helps organise your sports stuff. So for a volunteer coach, it reduces their time. It's called Spond, and I've just been talking to them today, and they're just going to produce a report. Actually, 40% of coaches in the UK. Actually, they spoke to 700 coaches, 40% of 700 coaches, not 40% of coaches in the UK, but 40% of 700, if that's a reflective number, said that one of their biggest challenges, and they're actually thinking of giving up because of the parental pressure, right? So, and I get that question all the time. It's got to be the biggest single question I get all the time. Now, some of those same people or coaches out there might be thinking, oh, I'd love to do that kind of mandatory meeting, right? But, it just wouldn't work in my place. Or, I take a lot of work to organize. It would, right? Okay, fine. Don't do it. But don't moan if you get a load of grief in the season from people, right? Because you haven't spent the time setting out to them, what they can expect of you. And you want them to hold you accountable to that. You want to say, I'm going to do this. I'll do my level best. And if I don't do that, then please tell me. And please have a conversation, because don't send me an email. Please have a conversation, because then we can at least address it face to face. Right? Blah, 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 blah. Right? And also, what I would hope that they, the expectations on them in terms of their behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. If you establish all of that, and from the perspective of, and what I love that is you've almost set out a manifesto for the sports experience, the 4 C's, the 5 F's, love them, framework, there you go. Right. This is what you can expect, right? Now, if you don't do that at the start of the season, then you can expect, well, if you then get a load of grief from people, because you haven't spent the time to do that, then kind of it's on you, right? Now, that's not to say you might not get problems. It's not to say you might not, right? But, and that's entirely like, but what I would say is that bit of preparation right at the start, that bit of planning, that bit of setting up the season and frameworking it will absolutely bear fruit going forward. And I've talked about this in the past, and one of the contributors to the podcast early on, one of my mentors, Mark Bennett, talks about this in terms of running a session with kids. Let's frame what is exceptional, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, right? Let's talk about that and be clear. Then let's actually hold ourselves accountable to that. In fact, you hold yourselves accountable to that, and if you don't hold yourselves accountable, then at that point I'll step in. It's a similar process, really, isn't it? You're establishing what the culture and environment and everything else is going to look like, and you can then make everybody a part of maintaining that. Make everybody responsible for maintaining that, as opposed to saying, I'm the person in charge, I'm going to do it my way, and if you don't like it, well, kind of it's on you sort of thing. Well, you're definitely not going to get people going along with that for very long.
And that's what we do, isn't it? Isn't that what we do? I mean, similar to you, when we talk to coaches, I say to coaches, I said, who does the customer experience the best out of anyone in the world? Disneyland. Disneyland you would never show up with your kids and then someone from Disneyland goes, okay, hey, listen, thanks for your kids. We're going to take them from here. You go sit out there and shut up as a 48-hour rule. We don't want to hear from you. You'd never hear that, right? So we got to get away from that in the sports sector too. And again, quality sport experiences. You've said it so many times this podcast. I totally agree. You're right. We set the bar so low, for people, and then we're perpetually disappointed that they didn't clear that low bar. We'll set the bar high. Make them part of the process. It's engagement. It's not education. No parent wants to go, oh, I can't wait to get there for my parent education meeting from this new coach. Engage them. There's a difference. Words matter. Be one organization. And you're right. And I'd almost get to the point of, that mandatory preseason meeting. Here's what we're doing. I completely understand if you are not interested. If this doesn't work for you and your family, no problem. I get it. There's tons of different sport organizations that you can go to. And, you just got to have the confidence that you're playing the long game, because those sport organizations that everyone hops to, and you've seen it a million times, I've seen it a million times, athletes go over to the greener grass only to come back later because, the coach there, I didn't get along with him, or there's some reason, but really the reason is because it wasn't actually any better. And so if we have those, we can significantly increase the value proposition of the quality sport and decrease to your point, decrease the chaos that seems to follow every sports season.
You make a really good point about engagement, not education, actually, because I do think some people go into that kind of a meeting with the wrong thing in mind, and I've seen this actually, in my in my own experience from actually this season just gone past, this summer season. And I guess it might have been because the coach that I was working kind of alongside with, I suppose, comes from an education background, and there was a desire to tell the parents, to teach the parents, to educate the parents, which I guess in some levels is maybe I can understand where that comes from, but the danger there is it can come across, particularly I think for some of the parents, can come across very adversarial. And you're absolutely right. It's got to be coming from that perspective of it's about engagement, right? And it's got to be a two-way conversation. And what you articulated to me in terms of, yes, it's kind of partly about standing in front and just, and engaging, but you asked a lot of questions. You asked the kids the questions, you asked the parents the questions. It's an engagement. So sometimes it's a challenging engagement. Sometimes it's, kind of parents cowering in the corner. I love that, by the way. But it's not from the perspective of saying, you're doing it all wrong. It's trying to bring to the surface a difficult area, a difficult subject matter, a difficult area of conversation, which it's easy to avoid, but the avoidance gives you the problems later on. So you may as well be front up with it.
Absolutely. And when we did this for the last soccer team that we were at, it was amazing. Afterwards, parents came up and said, and you never know how parents are going to take it. And the one dad who the kid outed came up and said, "You know what? Thank you very much. I am that guy. I am that guy, and I got to do better at that. So thanks very much." And I was like, "Okay, so sorry for outing you." But a lot of parents came up and said, "That was amazing, because we're telling our kids all the time about proper nutrition. They're not listening. You said it, they're listening. We're telling them all the time about get outside and play." And what we said was to the kids, we said, you got to put your phones away. And if your parents are yelling at you, put your phones away. You tell them that, remember what Coach Matt said, you blame me. I don't care. Again, like you said, it keeps it light. It opens people up. And when people are opened up, they go from arms folded and arms crossed to holy smokes, laughing and thinking. And that's really what you want to do. And, there was nothing more powerful in that meeting to have the coaches, when we asked what the coaches wanted and needed, to have them discuss, I really need your trust. If you're doing it, I need you to work with me through the season. I need you to understand it's not about the wins and losses immediately. I need you to understand what our definition of win is, and that it includes more than the score. I really need that. And I got to tell you, when 2 weeks later we went back to do our assessment, our preseason assessment, our athlete assessment, we had parents doing the beep test with the kids. So there was 4 parents running with the kids doing their beep test. All the parents were cheering. It was pouring rain. They were all out supporting. I'd never seen it come together that well. And parents were on board. This is one group. And like you said, I'm not going to be surprised at where they end up at the end of the season, because they've done all of this work at the beginning. Of course we'll follow it and go, "Oh yeah, oh my God, you guys did really well based on whatever your metrics were." Surprise, surprise. So, it's simple, but it's not easy. But it's infinitely harder if you don't even start.
100%. Interestingly enough as well, I've just been thinking about kind of, this is the stuff that coaches are never taught about. So even if they go on a coach education course, they don't talk about this stuff. They talk about the activity. They talk about the technical. They talk about the tactical. They might talk about the physical. They might talk about some of the mental, social, emotional. Unlikely, but they sometimes do. What they don't talk about is all the other stuff. This is what I call the kind of the mechanics of coaching. It's the kind of environmental culture setting and everything else around it, which then enables all of the stuff to go for. I talk about the reason the talent equation is created is that I created this equation for talent development. And when I say talent development, people think I'm talking about, kind of high performance athletes. I am not. Talent starts from everywhere. It's in everybody. And all this is about is potential and giving people the opportunity to realize their potential, whatever that may be. And from my perspective, when I talk about the talent equation, I talk about talent being about ability multiplied by mindset, in brackets, and then multiplied again by external factors, or what I would say is the environment. And all of these factors are in there. So if you can get the parental side, the schooling side, the club side, everything else all aligned, everything else is really turbocharged. But if you think it's the stuff in the brackets, right, I'm just going to work on their mindset and work on their ability, and most people are only working on their ability, you're leaving behind so much of the stuff that will make everything else. It's like the grease on the wheels in the machine. And the danger is then you find that the cogs start to grind against each other. That's where the friction is. That's where the dropout happens. That's where your frustration as a coach, because we're getting as much coach burnout as we are player burnout. We don't even talk about coach burnout. But part of that is self-inflicted.
100%. Okay, so thank you for bringing up that point. I want to go back to the personal training business.
Right.
What was our differentiating factor? Experience. Our 5 spheres were the physical sphere, social, emotional, intellectual spheres. Okay, so those were our spheres. 99% of all the personal trainers in our community focused on one thing, the physical sphere. That's all they focused on.
Yeah.
We created a system that tapped into all of those other spheres. When people walked into the club, their name was yelled. When it was their birthday, everyone sung happy birthday. We created a community. When we went into the communities, instead of going to the physios who said, well, don't go train with him, he's just hurting you, we went to the top physio and said, we're going to have people, they're going to get hurt, we want them back in the program as soon as possible, we're going to liaise with you. But run shop, bike shop, physio, chiro, massage. We went into communities and we built a community. And instead of everyone operating in their intellectual silos, we said, let's do it as one, and we'll feed you the clientele because we've got the people that can come. $97 million. When we go into sport, and I want to touch on, this is heading somewhere, so bear with me. Okay, the 4 C's: competence, confidence, character, connection. Okay, 100%. What's 100% divided by 4? 25%. If all we're focusing on is the physical and technical tactical competence, we're leaving 75% of talent development and the holistic athlete development. We're leaving 75% of that off the table, completely off the table. And we're wondering why we get the problems that we do with the burnout and the focus. This, once you master the competence, confidence, and character aspects, they're not hard. We've broken them down. We've defined them. What are the initial, emerging, competent, and proficient? We actually grade them. We've got a system that grades them. And once you get into that, a couple things happen. You switch parents' focus, because we sent it out to that soccer team. We said, listen, here are 10 definitions that fall under confidence, social, emotional learning. You guys vote and pick the 3 that you're most interested in for your kids. So the parents came back, they picked the 3. What do you think's happening when the parents have picked those 3? What do you think they're starting to focus on now at the beginning of the season, instead of did he shoot down the sidelines and score? What do you think they're trying to focus on at home and different things? Of course, they're implementing some of those things. And that's really, again, multi-stakeholder engagement from the parents, engagement from the course, the coaches, and most importantly, engagement from the athletes. The athletes know they're getting evaluated on focus, game sense, relationships with teammates. And let me ask you this, it's a rhetorical question. If only 2% of all athletes make it to the pros, that means 98%. It's a dress rehearsal for real life. What should we be preparing and educating our athletes on? Should it be the technical, tactical skills? Should it be the physical skills? Or should it be all of these other interpersonal management skills that they're going to need to use for the rest of their life? I already know the answer, but I love the point that you just made, because that is really, for me, holistic athlete development. When you're talking about athlete development, you better be baselining it, you better be measuring it, and you better be including all of those 4 C's in terms of your definition.
And if sport is a dress rehearsal for life, and it clearly has a role to play in that respect, what the world of work is recognizing now, because I'd add an extra C, by the way, to the 4, which is creativity. Because I think that's diminished, or that's being kind of squashed out of particularly in the drive for competence. So, but let's stick with the 4 for now. If the focus is on competence, even in the world of work now, people are recognizing that people who are competent, even highly competent at tasks, aren't the finished article. It's the people with the ability to foster great connections, brilliant relationships, the people who are able to who've got great character, and are prepared to go the extra mile, prepared to do the extra things to either get the job done or for the customer or whatever it is, and it's the people actually who are confident in their abilities and all those sorts of things. So developing an individual's confidence, character, and ability to connect are core ingredients for the future employee or the future entrepreneur or the future business leader or whatever it might be. And to think that all you got to do is just get good, you'll be fine. It only lasts for so long. You found out eventually, because you can be good, but if you're good but you're a nasty piece of work, well, you don't last very long. And a lot of organizations, the likes of your Googles, etc., tech firms, are hiring on character. Because we can develop your competence. That's easy. Anyone could, well, not anyone, but we can develop your coding capabilities, etc., etc. What we can't do though is take you from being a horrible person to a nice person. That's really difficult. So at the very least, it's now becoming as important as competence. If not, it's becoming more important than competence. And I certainly, as a hiring manager, I've made mistakes in the past. I've gone for people who are super competent, and it nearly always bit me in the backside. So now it's nearly always based on, if I've got two choices to make, one person who I think's got all those other qualities, but maybe not quite as competent as the other person, I'll always go on the character, because I can help them develop the competence, and that's part of my job as a manager.
Absolutely. And if they have those other competencies, then they will be willing to be developed in their areas of improvement. 100%.
And I think so. For me, I think we're missing a trick if we think that not developing those other attributes in young people is not at least as important. And like you say, it should be set. And I've learned this to my cost. I was trained as a coach in the technical and tactical skills of my sport. Right, I did the technical and tactical skills of my sport over and over and over again with these groups of people, and learned the hard way over 15 years of toil, or like we've referred to on the podcast several times as the wilderness years, that actually it's about that other stuff. That's where the success comes from. So most of my work as a coach is done off the field. Most of my work is done one-to-one with individuals or with parents or whatever it is, phone calls, conversations. That's where I can bring out the best in people. And it can be as simple as telling them about what their strengths are. It can be simple as telling them about areas of their life that they are struggling with. And I can't necessarily give them any answers, but I can build a relationship with them that gives them a sense of belonging, trust, feeling like they're part of something, feeling like they're willing to do different things. And I think those are the lessons that I've learned. So it's like you talk about psychology. It's like being a coach is being a psychologist. You're dealing with human beings. They've got brains. They've got emotions. They've got mental cognitive challenges, whatever everybody has in different ways. And being able to tap into that is part of it. And I by no means am I an expert in that, but I know it's a key area if you want to be able to help people to better themselves in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree. And one of the things that we say often to people is a quality coach, or a measure of a great coach isn't getting players to onboard with your system. The measure of a great quality coach is helping players and athletes finish the season better than they started for themselves across a variety of different metrics. It's not buying into your system. It's you actually connecting with them, like you're talking about, and doing one thing to make them better, whether that's a challenge, whether that's a reinforcement of a great character trait, whether that's a suggestion for an opportunity to brighten up an area. That's really the measure of a quality coach, isn't it? Isn't that why people come back and say, hey, listen, I just want to thank you. You taught me so much. I wasn't ready for it then, but I'm ready for it now. Like, that's the measure of a great and good coach, not the players that you put through to the next level who don't want to come back because they had an awful experience getting there through you. So I just think we have to, look at that. And conversations like this are really important, because you're right. I think we don't know what we don't know sometimes. And the easiest thing for us to default to is the X's and O's. What am I doing in the X's and O's? How am I structuring the practice? What have I got this game time in? Like, we don't take the EQ, the emotional quotient, into consideration, because people say it's hard. It actually isn't that hard. It's not that hard if you've got a few tools and you know how to draw it out. It's not that hard.
And if any coach out there who thinks that wins, losses, score lines, are the measures by which good coaches are defined, then what they need to understand is that works to a point, and certainly works in the high performance context, because the high performance context is defined by that. Mm-hmm. That is it, right? But at the same time, that high performance context means that you as a coach will always be a hostage to fortune, because you can have a team that plays fantastically, does everything that you've worked on in your amazing training sessions, and still lose because of the bounce of the ball, or or the luck of the draw, or whatever it might be, or a moment of individual brilliance by an opponent, or whatever it might be, right? And if your only definition of your competence as a coach is that outcome, then you're always just accept that you are a hostage to fortune, because
100%.
There are people in high performance context who lose their jobs on a daily basis because of that one factor, because it's a results business. So if you want to define yourself that way, by all means do, but don't get bent out of shape when people come along and say, sorry, no thanks anymore. Right. So your other options are all the things you've listed. All right. How much fun? Are they developing friendships? Are they playing fairly? Are they having friendly competition? I actually wrote down, because I was writing very quickly, finishing the season better than you started. I actually wrote down finishing the season with as many players as you started with, if not more. Yeah, but that's another definition, Now, for me, they are the ways I'd want to be measured. Because, and then I would hope off the back of that, one of the outcomes might be that we actually perform quite well by whatever benchmark we establish for ourselves.
Right.
My point being that you can't really, if you do all those, you can't go wrong. No one
can't lose.
Yeah, and then here's the killer: at the performance level, the most successful people, and I talk about over here in the UK, the likes of your Pep Guardiolas, the likes of your Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp's a great example. Both of those people understand implicitly that those core aspects of human interaction around the idea of confidence, around the idea of connection, of the of togetherness, are absolutely central to their success as a coach. Right? You never talk about it, you never see it, you never hear about it, but that is fundamentally successful, and that's what defines the greatest. We're beginning to wake up to this now. Right? And the coaching, I think, will begin to see a renaissance as we start to see the human side of coaching have more prevalence. But I love the fact that you've almost created that 5F framework. It's really nice as a means by which for coaches to say, actually, that's how I'm going to judge myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and hey, listen, full disclosure, again, the wheel doesn't need to be reinvented for youth sport. It needs to be aligned. So a lot of the stuff that I'm sharing, I've learned from other people too. Sure. I learned from you. I learned from other coaches. I learned from everybody too. We all have to subscribe to the notion that we're lifelong learners, especially in coaching, especially in sport. The minute we think we know it all is the minute we probably should pack it in, because something's always changing every day and people are not the same. We're not dealing with robots. So yeah, use those frameworks, use the tools. I am twice the beauty is seen when shared. I am of the mindset, of the abundance mindset. We need as many people sharing the things that are working. We need to start highlighting the good stories, not just the bad stories, not just going, oh, can you believe this? There's a national Little League World Series championship for 9-year-olds. Like that stuff is not going to go away. The saying is, you'll never change a system by fighting against it. To change a system, you need to create a new one that makes the old one obsolete. And I really like your point of the whole renaissance of coaching, because I think in addition to the renaissance of coaching, we should be working for a renaissance of player understanding, a renaissance of parent engagement, a renaissance in coaching development, a renaissance of how organizations value and support their all of their stakeholders. And let's not forget the officials. None of these matches happen without officials. And
Sure.
Last I checked, we could use a little bit of a top up on our manners on how we treat officials, because they don't have the the vantage point of a big screen, 60-inch big screen TV in slow motion while things are going on in real time. They're going to make mistakes. So, we need to, we've just taken it so serious in almost every facet from starting from so young. We just need to pump brakes a little bit and understand that this is an experience for our kids. We would never take our kids to Disneyland and speed rush them through every single ride as fast as they could and make them stay like we just wouldn't do that. We have to start thinking along the same planes as that. So I like the Renaissance idea. I think it could apply to all of the stakeholders. We've built lots of tools and resources, really focus on the how, and we've really been mindful to keep all of the stakeholders together. I've said that a lot during this podcast. The stakeholders, again, the athletes, the parents, the officials, the educators, the coaches in the sport organization. There are 6 key cogs that need to operate together. Most of the issues come from one of those stakeholders not knowing, not being engaged, being left out, not being on the same page. So let's, like you said, let's spend, if we've got 4 hours to chop down the tree, let's spend 3 hours sharpening the axe instead of flailing away.
That's a great way of kind of sort of, I guess, starting to wrap our conversation up a little bit, because I want to be mindful of your time. And not least of which, I feel very guilty that my children currently are probably watching a screen as opposed to being out playing, and that's because I'm recording a podcast with you, and the irony of that is not lost on me. Matt, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Listen, I know people are going to want to reach out. I know people are going to want to find out more. They're going to want to find out where they can watch the movie, etc., etc. Tell them about the myriad ways they can get in touch.
Yeah, again, you can go online and see the movie. The Cost of Winning, it'll be on the Potential Pictures website. They can go there. If they want to connect with me by email, info@qcoachingcollective.com. That's info@qcoachingcollective.com. Twitter is the social media where I see all of us. Like, I see the most amount of coaches and people that are in our wheelhouse. That's Matt Young 101. That's my Twitter handle, and I'm up for conversations. I blend them in with the workaround time and out and play time, so I'm not stapled to my desk all day, but I am very responsive. I'll get back to you within 24 hours. We've got a lot of tools and resources. I'm going to be sending you one by the end of the week that I think you're going to like. I'm going to look for your feedback. I'm going to look for any lessons that you want to contribute and courses that you want to contribute. It's time that we started building a quality sport hub. It's time that if there is no leadership, instead of complaining that there's no leadership, we need to start taking some leadership. So we've got lots of stuff that's always going on, and lots of different tools and resources that people can have and access, and we're happy to help.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with me. I love the fact that you're doing what you're doing. I really enjoyed the movie. I will be sharing it within my own. I've got a couple of online communities, and we'll be having a conversation about it and then sharing it amongst that wider network, taking action. I'm now thinking about how to frame my mandatory meeting. And the way to do that. But I've really appreciated the conversation. I've taken a lot from it, and all the best for the next phase.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Thanks for having me on the Talent Equation. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it. Yes, really great conversation. Just love some of the stuff that came out of that. I love the fact that, you've got somebody so passionate, so committed to helping young people get involved in sport, very much, at the centre of what we're trying to do here at the Talent Equation, and a great conversation with Matt. Got loads of energy, clearly, and I love the fact that his big focus, I suppose, is around the athlete experience. And when somebody has been successful in business by putting that first, the kind of customer first, if you like, there's a lot we can take from that in terms of how we provide the child's sports experience as well. So a lot in that. A couple of other bits and pieces I think are just worth reflecting on. I love the idea of the 5 Fs: fun, friends, fair play, friendly competition, and finishing the season better than you started, with as many players as you started. And then wrapping that around the 4 Cs, or the C system, if you like, around the idea of competence, connection, character. I want to add in creativity. I'd probably put there's connection in there. You might want to put caring in there. You could go on, but there's some really nice factors, and then potentially using that as the way you measure your performance over the season and putting that out there. And then the final thing is the mandatory meeting. I love the idea of that, and that's going to be something that we bring to the table as far as all of the coaching experiences that I'm involved with, because we've got to get those parental stakeholders to understand where we're going and bring them on the journey with us, because they're as important, if not they're as important as the children, in terms of making them feel as if they have a role to play in this. That's not just dropping kids off and picking them up. They're an active part of the sports experience. So hope you enjoyed that. Conclave's going from strength to strength, and there's some new things happening in the world of the Conclave, and if you are interested in getting involved, now is the time to do so. The Conclave don't know this yet, but they're about to embark on a developmental journey for themselves. I'm going to be taking them through as a team of beta testers, if you like, a new program that I'm running, which is called Skill Acquisition Specialist, and they're going to be road testing it with me. And if you want to be a guinea pig and get in there first for the king's ransom of £10 a month as a supporter on the podcast, go to Patreon, join in, say I want to be part of the Conclave, and you can come on that learning journey with us. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week of coaching. I'm off for a few days of hopefully sun, sea, surf. I'm hoping not rain and wind like I had last week, and I'll see you in probably about 2 weeks' time. All the best.